Something inside you doesn't know how to hold it. Not because you're unworthy, but because part of you still believes that having more means risking more, that if you let abundance in, it will only be ripped away. That being seen is dangerous, that shining is a threat, and that thriving will only awaken the punishment you learn to expect. So you retreat, not because you want to fail, but because your soul remembers the pain of being visible, of standing out, of hoping too much and losing everything. And this is the quiet tragedy. Most people don't even realize they are living in survival mode, smiling on the outside, while secretly terrified of expansion. They say they want wealth. They repeat the words. But their nervous system is screaming for protection. And the moment something good comes close, they brace for loss. Because love, safety, and success were once tied to conditions. And now the mind can't separate opportunity from threat. That's why you don't sabotage consciously. It's not stupidity, it's loyalty. Loyalty to an identity that was forged in fear. Loyalty to the version of you who learned to stay small to stay safe. And as long as that version is running the show in the background, you can't just manifest your way out of this. You have to break the contract you made with scarcity. The one that said, I won't ask for too much. I won't be too big. I won't shine too bright. I won't need anything. I'll be quiet. I'll be good. Just don't leave me. And that's the part that must die. Because the version of you that made that vow was a child. And you're not that child anymore. But if you don't consciously sever that agreement, your life will still be governed by it. Your energy will stay small. Your ideas will stay buried. And your dreams will never leave the safety of your imagination. Carl Jung wasn't teaching about wealth. But he understood something most people still miss. Your outer life is a mirror of your inner structure. If you are split inside, if part of you desires and another part resists, your results will always feel like chasing smoke. Because the energy behind your efforts isn't aligned. It's fractured. And you can't build something lasting on a foundation that doesn't believe it deserves to exist. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the fear. Before you decided that being invisible was the only way to survive. It's about going back to the place where your soul first learned to shrink and reclaiming what you left behind. Not with blame, not with anger, but with fierce compassion. Because that wound, as deep as it runs, has always been trying to protect you. Even now, it still thinks it's keeping you safe. But safety and aliveness are not the same thing. You weren't born to just be safe. You were born to be whole. And wholeness requires truth, even the uncomfortable kind. So if there's a part of you that keeps pushing away the very life you're trying to build, don't shame it. Don't silence it. Ask it what it's afraid of. Ask it what it learned. Ask it what it needs in order to let go. Because it's not your goals that are too big. It's your internal permission that's too small. And maybe, just maybe, everything you've ever wanted is already close. But it's waiting for one thing. For you to finally believe that you are allowed to have it. That you are not cursed. That you're not too broken. That you don't need to earn your worth with suffering. You just need to remember who you were before the world convinced you that shrinking was noble. And once you do, the door will open. Not from the outside, but from within. You see, there's something far more dangerous than failure. It's success that your nervous system isn't prepared to hold. The moment life offers you something bigger, better, brighter, that's when the real resistance shows up. Not outside, but inside. In the tremble of your chest when things go well, in the sudden exhaustion after a breakthrough, in the urge to run, hide, or sabotage the very thing you've been praying for. It's not because you're broken. It's because your nervous system still equates safety with suffering, still ties love to struggle, still sees joy as something borrowed that must be paid back. And that's what no one talks about. The way you can fear your own expansion more than your pain. Because pain is familiar. It's predictable. It was the backdrop of your upbringing, the currency of your connections, the language of your love. You learned to make a home in discomfort. You learned that earning meant effort, and effort meant exhaustion. So when ease finally arrives, when something feels too good, too peaceful, too loving, you flinch. You question it. You scan for what's wrong. Not because you're negative, but because peace feels suspicious when you've only known chaos. This is the invisible war inside so many of us. We want the light, but we've been conditioned to worship the dark. We say we want freedom, but we still cling to the chains because they were passed down by the people we once loved. We still bow to the inner critic because it sounds like our mother's warning, our father's silence, our teacher's disapproval. We don't even notice that the jailer lives inside us now, that the judgment is internalized, that the cage isn't made of steel, but of stories. And those stories run deep. They are old, ancient even. They tell you that staying small is noble, that being invisible is safe, that asking for more is selfish. But these are not truths. They are survival codes from a life that no longer exists, from a child who needed them. And now you are grown, but still living by a child's laws, still believing that fitting in is safety, still dimming your light so no one feels threatened, still apologizing for wanting more than just enough. But just enough is killing you. It's dulling your spirit. It's taming your fire. There's nothing virtuous about playing small. There's nothing holy about pretending you don't have needs. You are not more lovable because you suffer quietly. You are not more worthy because you earn everything through self-denial. And you are not safer because you blend in. You're not here to be tolerated. You're not here to survive in silence. You are here to awaken, to remember, to rise. But that rising will not happen until you stop arguing for your limitations, until you stop confusing humility with self-erasure, until you stop mistaking inherited shame for wisdom. Healing is not about fixing what's broken. It's about reclaiming what was buried. Your brilliance, your power, your right to take up space. And that begins the moment you recognize that the voice in your head telling you to shrink isn't yours. It's a ghost, a leftover echo of someone else's fear, someone else's pain, someone else's wound. You've carried it long enough. You've sacrificed yourself at the altar of belonging long enough. But belonging that demands your silence is not love. Acceptance that asks you to betray yourself is not safety. You don't have to keep proving your worth. You were always worthy. You just forgot. They made you forget. And now it's time to remember. You don't need permission to step into your fullness. You don't need approval to be whole. You're not greedy for wanting more. You're not selfish for desiring ease. You're not wrong for choosing joy. You're simply waking up to a truth that was always inside you, waiting to be heard beneath the noise. The truth that you are enough, not when you suffer, not when you earn it, but now, just as you are, always have been. And the most radical thing you can do in a world built on scarcity and shame is to choose yourself without apology, to stand in your truth even when your voice shakes, to stop abandoning yourself just to feel accepted. That's not rebellion, that's homecoming. That's what it means to heal, not to become someone else, but to finally return to who you were before the world told you to be less. It's not what you think. It's not laziness or weakness or even fear in the way most people define it. It's comfort, a dangerous kind. The comfort of pain you've grown used to. The comfort of struggle that's become so familiar it no longer feels like suffering. It just feels like you. When a wound is ignored long enough, it doesn't vanish. It weaves itself into your identity. It hides in the language you use, in the choices you make, in the way you walk through the world. And eventually it convinces you that it belongs, that it's who you are. And once pain becomes an identity, everything begins to orbit around it. Your beliefs, your habits, your relationships, your dreams. You're no longer just experiencing struggle. It's on you're becoming it. The most dangerous trap that isn't a bush-broken life. It's the well-decorated cage. The kind of life that appears stable on the surface. Routines followed, or responsibilities fulfilled, maybe even a few smiles along the way. But inside, everything is dry, dull, empty. You wake up and function. You perform. You cope. But nothing inside you feels alive. And the most haunting part is realizing that the problem isn't that life won't give you more. It's that something in you doesn't know how to let it in. Somewhere in your past, you were taught that joy is unsafe, that love comes with strings, that success will isolate you. So you block it. Not with your words, not with your intentions, but with your nervous system, with your silence, with the tiny, constant ways you shrink yourself. Your unhealed wounds don't just deny you pleasure. They teach you to reject it before it even arrives. Not dramatically, subtly. You hesitate before good things. You guilt trip yourself out of rest. You disconnect when you feel seen. You numb yourself before intimacy can root. These patterns don't scream. They hum. Softly, daily, until you forget they're even there. But you know, some part of you knows, this isn't the life you came here to live. You weren't born to survive through gray, muted days. You weren't made to be a ghost inside your own story. The turning point doesn't come when you finally hustle hard enough. It comes when you stop running, when you look inward, When you recognize that the voice whispering not enough isn't truth, it's a memory, a scar, a story passed down to you that you no longer have to carry. Healing doesn't begin with fixing the world outside. It begins with seeing that you are not your wound. You are the one who felt it, and you are the one who can free yourself from it. First you survive. That's what you're taught. That's what you're praised for. You keep moving, you stay productive, you hold it all together, you push, you grind, you never stop. On the surface, it looks like ambition, like drive. But if you look closer, it's not expansion. It's escape. Because somewhere along the way, your nervous system learned that peace wasn't safe. That quiet moments meant danger. That stillness left you exposed. So you ran. You ran from silence, from calm, from presence. You ran into busyness and burned out calendars, into perfectionism, into proving. You made noise so you wouldn't have to feel. You chased goals, not because they lit you up, but because the stillness terrified you. Because in the stillness, the buried pain would start to speak. And even now, when you try to rest, your body rebels. You get restless, anxious, like something's wrong, like something's gonna collapse. So you go back to the motion. You fill your days with tasks and call it discipline. But underneath it all is a child who never got to feel safe doing nothing. A heart that was only ever praised for being useful, not for simply existing. You confuse fatigue for fulfillment. You mistake distraction for purpose. And slowly, quietly, you lose the ability to just be. No mask, no mission, just presence, just breathe. But true abundance doesn't live in that noise. It's not born from the grind. It doesn't grow in chaos. Real prosperity starts in silence, the kind that doesn't scare you anymore, the kind that feels like a home, not a trap. It starts when you can sit with yourself without the impulse to improve or perform, when you can breathe without guilt, rest without shame, receive without panic. That's when something shifts. You stop chasing, you start arriving, you stop becoming someone, and remember who you already are. Then something else happens. You forget how to receive. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, slowly, over years. Because when you've been hurt and dismissed or left unseen for long enough, you start to believe you must earn everything, especially love, especially care. So you give. You give your time, your energy, your heart, your everything. Not because you're generous, but because giving makes you feel safe. It makes you feel worthy. So you overextend. You overdeliver. You abandon your own needs to meet someone else's. Because being needed feels like belonging. It feels like value. But when someone tries to give to you, you shrink. You flinch. You tell them you're fine. You brush it off. You feel uncomfortable, exposed. You downplay your worth. You doubt the intention. You start to sabotage the very thing you've been craving: love, support, recognition, because on some level you still don't believe you're allowed to have it. You mistake receiving for weakness. You confuse vulnerability with danger, so you push it away. This happens everywhere. In love, at work, in friendships. You stay small when life wants to lift you. You whisper when the moment asks you to speak. You hesitate when it's time to shine. And deep down, it's not humility. It's fear. It's the wounded part of you that still doesn't believe in your right to thrive. But that can change when you begin to unlearn the idea that you must earn love. When you start to believe that you are enough even in your stillness. When you accept that receiving is not a luxury, it's part of healing, it's part of balance, it's part of coming home to yourself. And when that happens, when you finally stop apologizing for being whole, the life you've been longing for will no longer feel unreachable. It will feel like it was waiting for you all along. Because somewhere deep within, there's a quiet belief hiding in the shadows. A belief that says receiving something good means you'll have to pay for it later. That joy is just a trick. That comfort is bait. And that something painful is always waiting just around the corner to balance out anything beautiful. It's not logic, it's not conscious, it's emotional conditioning, crafted in childhood, refined through disappointment, hardened by survival. It's the story of someone who learned early on that love had strings, that laughter was always followed by silence, that every moment of warmth came with a warning, and that wounded child, still alert, still hurting, still frozen in time, doesn't disappear. They just move into the background and start making decisions for you. So when something good comes along, an opportunity, a relationship, a moment of ease, there's a subtle resistance, a tightening, a pause that says, careful? Because somewhere in your nervous system, safety has been wired to mean struggle, and anything outside that feels suspicious. That's why vision boards and mantras fall flat if they don't reach the place inside you that's still flinching. That's why change doesn't stick, when your inner world still believes that abundance is dangerous. Because the part of you that's trying to heal is going to lose every time to the part of you that's trying to protect. And protection doesn't care about your goals. It only knows patterns. If your nervous system believes joy leads to pain, it will destroy joy before pain has a chance to. Real transformation begins when you stop trying to force the outcome and start listening to the fear behind the resistance. Not why am I failing, but what part of me still believes this is unsafe. Until you meet that part with understanding, not shame, you'll keep building walls in the name of protection. You'll push away the very things you claim to want, and then you'll justify it. You'll call it fate. You'll call it timing. You'll say the universe is teaching you patience. You'll cloak your self-sabotage in spiritual phrases because it's easier than admitting you're scared. And when fear becomes too familiar, you rewrite the entire script of your life to support it. You build philosophies around your pain. You say, money doesn't matter, not because you believe it, but because wanting more reminds you that you've lived with less. You say, maybe I'm not meant for more, because reaching for it and failing feels worse than not reaching at all. The mind is brilliant at making discomfort make sense. So you repeat old stories dressed in wisdom, stories that protect the wound from exposure. You don't call it fear, you call it humility. You don't call it doubt, you call it surrender. But your soul knows the truth, it always has. And it's not fooled by your clever rationalizations, because you weren't born to stay small. You weren't made to defend a life that doesn't light you up. You didn't come here just to survive. But until you confront the beliefs you've inherited, the voices that told you not to dream too loud, not to shine too brightly, not to reach too far, you will continue to live inside the cage you've mistaken for home, not because it's safe, but because it's familiar. And that familiarity will start to shape your identity. Before long, scarcity isn't something you're going through. It becomes who you are. And that's the most dangerous thing of all, because once lack becomes part of your story, you stop seeing any reason to rewrite the ending. But there's always a choice. And that choice begins the moment you stop pretending your limits are holy. The moment you say, I'm scared, but I'm done hiding. That's when you reclaim the pen. That's when you begin again. Not because it's easy, but because pretending is exhausting. The truth might be hard, but at least it's real. And only from that place can anything meaningful grow. Because when your soul is wounded, the entire world changes. Not because the world changes, but because your eyes do. You start seeing threats where there are opportunities. You start hearing judgment in every compliment. You start closing doors that were wide open because open feels dangerous. Other people's success begins to sting, not because you're unkind, but because you're unresolved. Their light feels like proof of your own dimness, even though it never was. And trust becomes a foreign language. You question motives. You dissect kindness. You brace for betrayal because history has trained you to. Even love becomes a riddle. You can't receive it without scanning for the fine print. You assume everyone wants something, and when they don't, it makes you uneasy. So you sabotage. You retreat. You analyze instead of feel. Because brokenness doesn't just sit quietly, it distorts everything. It makes you think you're protecting yourself when really you're cutting yourself off from the very thing that could set you free. Abundance feels unsafe. Joy feels temporary. Intimacy feels like a trap. And you end up building a life that reflects not who you are, but what you fear. But the truth is, healing doesn't happen when everything is perfect. It begins when you get tired of your own illusions. When you stop blaming the world and start listening to the echoes inside you. When you realize that no one is coming to save you, but no one needs to. Because the version of you that's waiting underneath the pain, that version is powerful. That version remembers. That version doesn't settle for a life built on defense mechanisms. That version is still alive, and they're waiting for you to choose them. It doesn't matter how many gifts life places at your feet. If your hands can't hold them, if your heart can't believe it deserves them, they will vanish like smoke. Not because you weren't chosen, but because you couldn't receive. There's a quiet tragedy in that. When the soul is wounded, abundance feels foreign. It's mistaken for luck, for a mistake, or worse, for something meant for someone else. So you drop it. You push it away. You shrink from it, tell yourself you're not ready, not enough, not capable of keeping something so beautiful. And so, the cycle continues. Love arrives but doesn't stay. Opportunities come, then disappear. Peace touches your skin but doesn't sink in. Because deep down, your inner world doesn't feel safe enough to hold what's good. The cracks in your foundation make everything unstable. You overthink, you doubt, you sabotage, not because you're flawed, but because you're unhealed. Healing isn't a luxury, it's survival. Without it, even paradise feels threatening. You'll live in fight or flight even in the presence of everything you once prayed for. You'll hoard, chase, or repel, not because you want to, but because you've been conditioned to. And that conditioning runs deep. It tells you to stay small, to blend in, to be pleasing. It tells you that lighting up the room is arrogance, that taking up space is dangerous. So you dim, you disappear, you sacrifice yourself to keep others comfortable, but the cost is heavy. You lose touch with who you are. And worse, you lose the capacity to become who you were always meant to be. Shame becomes the quiet puppeteer. That inherited voice that tells you you're too much or not enough or that wanting more is a betrayal. But that voice is a lie. Carl Jung said shame was a tool to keep us obedient, to keep us playing roles that were never ours to begin with. And when you believe that lie long enough, you forget what your truth even sounds like. But here's the thing. If you can recognize this, you can rewrite it. The same mind that was trained to survive can be retrained to thrive. And that's where everything begins to change. True rebellion doesn't look like chaos. It starts quietly, in the pause before the old reaction, in the space between your thoughts. In the moment you decide to stop living on autopilot and start living from awareness, the rebellion starts when you stop nodding to old stories that never fit you. It begins when you look at the wounds and finally name them. Because anything you won't name will control you. That's the hidden contract. Deny the pain, and it rules your life from the shadows. But name it, face it, and its power begins to dissolve. So you stand there and say it out loud, not for pity, not to blame, but because the truth is your doorway. This is my fear. This is my shame. This is what still hurts. And just by naming it, you begin to reclaim yourself. Then comes the deeper release, the kind that unhooks you from loyalty that's been keeping you stuck. Loyalty to your past, to family patterns, to outdated definitions of love and humility. You don't owe anyone your stagnation. Evolving isn't betrayal. It's honoring in everything they gave you by becoming more than they imagined possible. And the stories inside your head, they matter more than anything. The voice you use when you speak to yourself, it becomes your reality. So if that voice is soaked in fear, guilt, or unworthiness, that's the world you'll live in. But if you change that voice, if you meet yourself with compassion instead of criticism, everything shifts. Not from pretending you have it all together, but from finally deciding to stop abandoning yourself. You don't have to earn your worth. You never did. You only had to remember it. Then comes the hardest part, receiving. Not taking, not begging, just opening. Receiving requires trust, vulnerability. It asks you to believe that you don't need to suffer first, that joy doesn't have to be earned through pain, that life isn't here to punish you. You learn to say thank you without guilt, to accept help without apology, to celebrate yourself without shame. That's the energy that tells the universe you're finally ready to hold the life you've been calling in. And none of this can happen if your body still believes the past. Healing the mind isn't enough. You must bring your body with you. Because the body remembers. The body stores every betrayal, every moment of fear, every time you had to hold it all in. So you move it out. You breathe. You walk like someone who belongs here. You cry. You scream. You release. Because until your body feels safe, abundance will always feel like a threat. And once you begin to feel, once your body is no longer your enemy, your energy becomes sacred. Your attention becomes gold. What you allow in your space begins to matter more. And you stop leaking yourself for things that don't deserve you. Your energy is sacred. Every thought, every feeling, every choice is a form of currency. And if you spend that currency on complaining, on gossip, on measuring your worth against someone else's, you're bankrupting your own future. Because what you feed grows, and what you give away carelessly, you lose the power to shape. A healed soul starts with one powerful truth. It learns to say no. Not out of rebellion, but out of reverence. No to the noise, no to the emotional leeches, no to anything that dims the light you fought so hard to reclaim. And in that no, something quiet and miraculous takes root. The room for a yes that actually means something. A yes that carries the weight of purpose. Desire isn't sin. Desire is sacred. It isn't selfish. It's divine direction. It's the whisper of the soul calling you forward. But we've been trained to feel guilt for wanting, to apologize for dreaming, to shrink our passions into bite-sized pieces that don't disturb anyone. But you weren't born to be palatable. You were born to become. The real betrayal isn't in wanting too much. It's in silencing that want so others can feel safe in their limitations. True rebellion isn't loud. It's not chaos or destruction. It's the quiet rising of someone who finally chooses to stop abandoning themselves. It's the moment you unlock a door within you that was never really locked, just forgotten. Carl Jung once said that the individual who dares to be whole, even when rejected, is the one who transforms the world, not by force, but by reminding others of their own forgotten truth. And that's what you're doing now. You're waking up, not in comfort, but in clarity. The moment you stop begging, you start choosing. You stop adjusting your worth to someone else's measurement. And suddenly money becomes less of a monster, because your soul has stopped outsourcing its value. When you choose your soul genuinely, unapologetically, life begins to meet you with a different kind of abundance. One that doesn't just land in your bank account, but takes root in your body, in your relationships, in your sense of belonging to yourself. This kind of wealth isn't earned by hustle. It arrives when you stop fighting your own reflection and start listening to it. There comes a point when the revolution is no longer outside of you. It starts turning inward. The real fight isn't with the world. It's with the belief that you're not worthy of what you want. And here's the twist. Maybe it was never your life that needed to change. Maybe it was your relationship to the pain you've been carrying. That pain wasn't weakness. It was a scar from being taught that love must hurt to be real, that joy must be earned through suffering, that dreaming too big meant asking for punishment. That was the lie. The survival code passed down in a world that forgot how to receive, but you're remembering now. And yes, it stings. The dissolving of the mask hurts, but behind that mask, something more true is waiting. You're not cursed. Scarcity isn't punishment. It's a mirror reflecting the parts of yourself you've refused to claim. Every time you said yes to avoid conflict. Every time you said no to your own longing. That is what you're shedding now. That is what you're outgrowing. You can't step into richness while still being loyal to the pain. You can't open your hands to receive if your heart is still clinging to the story of who you had to be to survive. Because prosperity isn't about what you get. It's about what you stop pretending to be. It's the embodiment of your wholeness, not perfection, not a polished version of yourself, just wholeness, where your shadow sits beside your light and neither one is ashamed. But for that kind of wholeness to rise, something must fall away. The old version of you that coped instead of thrived. The version that performed for love instead of receiving it. That death is terrifying, but it's also beautiful. Because what comes after is the self you were always meant to become. The one who doesn't shrink. The one who doesn't explain their radiance. The one who simply lives. Aligned with truth instead of approval. And so the final step is not about striving. It's about remembering who you were before the wound, before you learned to fear your own voice. That child still lives in you. The one who danced without apology, who believed without evidence, who felt safe in their own skin. That part isn't gone. It's waiting for you to stop hiding, to say, I'm ready now. Ready to trust, to receive, to live without armor. And when you do, life shifts. Not because you earned it, but because you aligned with it. Suddenly things move. The right people come. Opportunities feel effortless. Money flows. Not because you chased it, but because you stopped chasing everything else. Because you finally came home. You stopped being at war with yourself. And that's what true wealth is. Not a bank statement, not an achievement. It's wholeness. It's the peace that arrives when you're no longer running, no longer pretending, no longer asking for permission. So take a breath. You don't need to rush. You don't need to fix anything. Just stay with what you feel right now. You are not broken. You're just waking up. And that, all on its own, is a miracle. When you stop trying to be someone else and finally return to yourself, everything you've been searching for knows exactly where to find you.